Hey y'all, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Vassal of El. And this was a young adult fantasy novel that came out in 2004, and this particular edition was put out in 2008. But it was in 2015 that I came across this book for the first time. And I was at a convention with a friend of mine, and one of the tables that they had there was a group of local writers. And one of the writers was Gloria Oliver. And she and I struck up a little conversation, and I wish I could remember verbatim what we talked about, but I remember that she was a very nice lady, had a good sense of humor, and some, good words of wisdom for aspiring writers, too. And I told her that I liked fantasy novels, amongst other things, and she recommended this book in particular. And, she was also kind enough to autograph it. And it says, "To Brown, may you always fly straight and true, Gloria Oliver, 2015. So it wasn't until years later that it wasn't until years after the fact that I, finally sat down and read this book. And it was a good one, and I wish I'd read it sooner. But, I mean, you pop open the first page, and, with the autograph there, I mean, I already got some good memories going. But, well, this was a really good book. And, one of the things I enjoyed about it was the fact that, while it is a fantasy novel for young adults, it's written well enough to where even adults can appreciate it. And that's usually the sign of a good writer, wherein, say, a writer can have a target demographic, but they're able to bring other demographics into the mix. So, let's go ahead and get into it. So, the setting, it takes place in a fantasy setting, and I don't remember if they actually named the world that it takes place in, but it's more or less like Earth in olden times, like say feudal setting and what have you. And there's two dominant races that are the focus of this story. You have the Landers, which are basically your average Joe humans, right? We till the soil. We've got villages, towns, castles, and things like that, or cities, kingdoms. So basically, just ordinary humanity. But on the other hand, there's the other race, the Chosen. And the Chosen live on these floating islands, above the earth. And, basically the Landers are literally below them. But whereas, the Landers are your, average Joe humanity, the Chosen are humanoid in appearance, but they have these, wings, like not just like harnesses or anything like that, but literal wings on their backs. And also they have more advanced technology. Case in point, the floating islands. And they have been known to interact with the Landers, and usually when they do so, there's, say, like a diplomatic office set up in one of the Landers' towns, wherein, say, if the Chosen deign to do business with, the Landers, one of the islands will settle above, whatever, settlement they want to do business with, and there'll be a delegation of Chosen that'll come down to do business with Lander diplomats, right? But they never invite the Landers up to them, and unfortunately there is more than a bit of a uncertain racial divide. And unfortunately this racial divide leads to both sides distrusting the other, because on one hand the Chosen, who are also called flyers by the Landers, they, view the Landers as inferior and literally call them grubs, but, when they're feeling magnanimous, they call them Landers. So, the Landers, on the other hand, they've no great love for the Chosen, seeing as how, they're literally above them and everything. And they also have nothing in the way of, weapons or technology that could possibly, defeat them. They know that they're outmatched as far as technology goes, and so they basically are like, okay, we just got to accept that they're there, but we don't have to like them. Like these, they're kind of like the Chosen kind of made me think of high elves, like, or say maybe like the like the high elves that you see in like a lot of fantasy settings, like Lord of the Rings or Skyrim or something like that. I mean, very uppity, arrogant attitudes, but undeniably skilled in the way of, say, warfare or technology as well. But anyway, though, it's in this particular setting that we meet our main character, Torin. And Torin is a young man in his early 20s, and he's made his living as a mercenary for quite some time, and he's had a traumatic incident happen in his past that's irrevocably scarred him, to the point that he can't bring himself to get too close to people. But the few people that he does come to regard as friends, he's basically their friend for life, and vice versa. But we don't exactly know what this event was that scarred him. We get snippets of it, and some of the nightmares that open up some of the chapters. But it's not until later on in the book that we find out exactly what happened to him. And we do know that Torin's got some baggage to him. Some especially mentally and emotional baggage. But one night, though, this young woman named Loriana literally runs across this campsite, and she's being pursued by these mercenaries called the Black Lords. And the Black Lords, they tend to work for some powerful people, and so the fact that they're going after Loriana is not a good thing. And so Torin saves her from them, and wants to know why they're after her, and she doesn't know, but she tells him that they basically murdered her adoptive family. And so when he finds out about that, he sympathizes with her, because he's experienced loss as well. And so he agrees to get her to the next town and basically protect her and stay with her until she gets there. And she's thinking that he's going to stay with her, even when they get to the new town. But he doesn't tell her that, once they get there, he's going to try and see if, he can find someone to take her in, and, maybe, put her as a worker for, maybe one of the traveling caravans or something. Like, basically someone to, take her in and help her, acclimate and give her a trade. So that way, she's not going to be, a helpless outsider. But he doesn't, of course, he doesn't tell her this, though. But as the two of them, get to know one another, I mean, Torin finds himself opening up a little bit around her, because he's usually closed off around people. But, she's able to sort of, get him to, let his guard down a little bit. And he comes to find out that she has some strange gifts. And, one of these gifts is this uncanny ability to haggle and bargain, and which comes in handy when, say, they're trying to get supplies from certain people. And Loriana is able to come in and haggle with the other party, to the point where her and Torin get the better deal, but the other party doesn't feel insulted by it. And so this is something that she can't really explain. It's just something that comes naturally to her. And she also has this empathic ability with animals too, which definitely comes in handy with stubborn horses. But most importantly, though, she has this ability to see, a repressed memory of yours, or at least, a traumatic memory of yours, just by touching you. And so when this happens with Torin, she gets a glimpse of what really happened to him, this bad memory that he's not wanting to, express to anyone. And so when that happens, he basically relives it, and he's thinking that she did it on purpose, and she's having to hurriedly explain that, no, I didn't do it on purpose. It's just sometimes, someone's pain just, calls out to me, and I have to see what it is. It's the pain, it draws me in, to where I want to, understand what happened and help the person if I can. And so initially this, pushes Torin away, but then, he comes to reluctantly, realize that no, she did not do that on purpose, and she still needs, his help. He can't just leave her because, she inadvertently dug up a bad memory of his that he tried to keep hidden. So, in the meantime, though, he comes to, learn something else about her. It turns out, see, that, she's the most recent vassal of El, and El is the main god of the Chosen. And it turns out, see, there's this, story of creation that the Chosen had, and that, the Landers, came to learn about as well. But, basically there's this, mother of all creation. She created the world, or she created, first, these gods that served as their children, and then she created, the world that humanity inhabits. And, all the gods basically considered themselves above humanity and just saw humanity as their playthings. But one of the gods, one of her children, who was named El, wanted to understand humanity, and so he requested that his mother send him down, to the world, to where he could basically live as a human, so he could better understand them. And she granted his request. And while all the other gods were like, "Why would you want to do that? I mean, you're lowering yourself to them. You're basically becoming inferior." But he wanted to understand humanity and experience what it was like to live as one of them. And so at first it was terrifying because he's used to living as a god, but then when he's reduced to being a normal human, he's having to go through all these experiences by himself, and like learning how to breathe, learning how to talk. And thankfully, though, he's found by a friendly, group of villagers who take him in, and they help him, and they take care of him, to the point where he's able to interact with them and talk with them, and he comes to learn about their culture, and in turn learns about some of the other cultures of humanity as well. But the time comes where he's felt like he's learned all he needs to learn about humanity, and so he reaches out to his mother, and she takes him back, and he tells her everything he's learned about humanity, and about how wonderful they can be if we guide them, and so also just how diverse humanity is, and how there's such this cacophony, how there's this like group, there's this range of emotions that humanity has, that rivals, in some ways it rivals those of the gods, but in some ways it's almost on equal footing of the gods. But the mother of all creation, though, basically was proud of her son El, and he wanted to express his gratitude to those who took him in. And so with his mother's blessing, he went back down to earth and revealed himself to the village that took him in. And he basically explained to him that he was a god, and he wanted to reward them for helping him all those years. And so he gave them the gift of flight. Namely, he gave them the ability to literally drive their lands, or fly their lands from one place to another. And so he basically lifted up whatever lands they had, and that's where you get these floating islands. And so these villagers, they could go anywhere they wanted to without leaving home. And over time, they came to grow wings, which was another gift of El from El, because, not only, are they able to, fly with these islands, but they're able to fly, by themselves because these wings are a part of them. So, one of the signs that El and his mother wanted to give to humanity was something called the Vassal of El. And this would be, a member of, this new race, of humans, this chosen, or the race of human, the group of humans that became the chosen. Every certain number of years, there would be one born among them who would be born without wings, but would basically be gifted with these, wondrous abilities, much like Loriana has. And unfortunately, though, the prior Vassal of El died under mysterious circumstances, and Loriana, it turns out, was kidnapped. And since she's the most recent Vassal of El, and she had been missing for several years, Torin realizes that, hey, this is someone who needs to go back to her people. And so, he reluctantly takes her to, in a city that they're in, or that they end up in, after having traveled in a caravan. He brings Loriana to this diplomatic branch of that the Chosen have in the city. And at first, he's kind of dismissed, because, he's just a quote-unquote lander or grub. But when he explains to him that, hey, that Vassal of El that y'all have been missing, this is her. And so, they bring them both in. And this is a first because, they've never brought, say, a lander up into one of their cities or into one of their floating islands. And so, by doing that, I mean, this is like a first. And a lot of people, both on the ground and above, are kind of like, what's going on here, But once Torin is brought into the city above, the floating island above them, of the Chosen, that's where things become a little bit more complex, because this whole idea that Lorena had been kidnapped all those years ago, I mean, it ties into this conspiracy that certain parties have, that basically some people are glad that Loriana is back, because I mean, she's the Vassal of El, and she's a very important part of the culture of the Chosen. But there are other parties that didn't want her back, and they've got their own ulterior motives and agendas, to where they see both Loriana and Torin as a threat. But Torin, it turns out, has a deeper connection to not only Loriana, but to the Chosen in general. And it's something that is long buried, that he didn't want to admit, but it's something that does come to play a rather important role in the preceding events. So yeah, this was actually a really well-written young adult fantasy story, and I was drawn in mainly because both Torin and Loriana were very well written, and we really came to care about both characters. And so, say, like, if one of them was in danger, we're kind of like on the edge of our seats because we become invested in these characters. And one of the things that was interesting is that there's never, say, like a straight up romance between them, but there is a building, chemistry between them, and to a point where you could definitely see a romance coming into place, say, somewhere down the road. But it doesn't happen in this book. But the potential is touched on, though. but I liked how they didn't go the obvious route. But but I liked seeing how, there was like this culture clash, because I mean, you got Torin, who's, been, say, living, as a loner mercenary, as a in the culture of the Landers for, all these years. And then you have Loriana, who is actually a member of the Chosen, but, she's actually been living life as a Lander herself and had no idea about, her actual heritage until she ended up crossing paths with Torin. But so it's interesting seeing as how, you have, two characters that in some ways are ignorant of, their own cultures, but in some cases willingly so, and in other cases, not so willingly so. But nonetheless, though, it's interesting to see how, both Torin and Loriana come to terms with certain revelations that come into play. And I also liked how, Torin, I mean, he was kind of like a defrosting, lone wolf, in a sense that, I mean, he's, harsh, and, he doesn't have much in the way of, say, I guess, mercy, when it comes to, say, having someone keep up with him, or in the way of, say, if someone's trying to attack him or something like that. Like, he plays for keeps when it comes to fighting, but he also, expects those he's helping to keep up with him. But it all stems from this traumatic event that happened to him when he was younger. And once we find out what that event was, I mean, you're kind of like, yeah, your mindset makes sense. But I like seeing how, his time with Loriana, basically, starts to bring out, I guess you could say, the more optimistic version of himself that, he used to be. And, we catch a glimpse of who he was before, this traumatic event, got to him and scarred him. And as far as Loriana goes, I mean, I liked how, I mean, the gifts that she has, I mean, they're just enough to, say, mark her as something, more than human, but at the same time, I like the idea that ties to the myth of creation that is in the story, wherein, the vassal of El would not have wings, as kind of like a reminder to say, it was served as a reminder about the relations between the Landers and the Chosen, because even though the Chosen see themselves as, literally above the Landers and better than them, at the end of the day, the Chosen actually came from the Landers. And so, I like the idea that, this vassal that was born every certain number of years would be without wings, but would nonetheless, have these wondrous other abilities, which Loriana has. And so it was really cool, finding out exactly what her story was. And it's interesting seeing her interact with not only those that she meets when she's with Torin, say, on the ground, but once she, ends up in, one of the floating cities, we're seeing her trying to adapt to, say, this culture that she had no idea that she was a part of originally. And, we see the reactions of, other, Chosen, to the situation, because some of them are thinking that she's been contaminated by, living as a Lander all these years. But other people are like, hey, I mean, what do you expect? I mean, she was kidnapped, she's not going to know, our ways. We have to give her time. So it was interesting seeing how, even though the Chosen were, quote unquote, above the Landers, I mean, there were divisions amongst them that, were very much like, divisions that you see in everyday humanity, like, say, when it comes to, say, politics and, scheming and what have you, because it turns out there's quite a bit of scheming going on. And, the Black Lords, of course, the mercenaries that, are frequently pursuing Torin and Loriana, they're tied into, say, forces, at work on both sides, on both, say, the side of the Landers and the side of the Chosen, that, want, for reasons of their own, they want both the Landers and the Chosen to go to war. And the Black Lords are just pawns in all this. But, it's sort of like plans within plans. And when certain characters, have their schemes revealed, you can't help but think that it's like, you hear about, scheming and backstabbing, in settings like, say, Game of Thrones or something like that, right? And that's just ordinary humanity, but at their most manipulative. But then on the other hand, you see that with, this race of quote unquote angelic people, and it's something that's more than a little disturbing in a way, because I mean, you see this race that's supposed to be better than humanity, but basically, being no better than humanity. Like, they're just as bad as humanity in some ways. Like, not all of them, but some of them. Like, some of them are just as petty and just as paranoid and just as suspicious as, anyone else on the ground. And so, it's interesting seeing, that, on one hand, that divisive nature between the two races, but also the commonality if in nothing else, say, the realm of paranoia and deviousness. But I mean, so it's interesting. Like, you don't expect to find something that complex in, say, a young adult fantasy story. So I gotta say, like, that was really impressive. And also, there were several supporting characters that I liked. There was, like, one particular character, a guy named Sal, who was the proprietor of this inn called the Wide Brimmed Inn. And he's actually an old friend of Torin's, because prior to him becoming the owner of an inn, he had actually worked as a mercenary. And Torin had actually ended up in his company on this one campaign. And Sal had, at first reluctantly, taught Torin how to fight, but it turned out to be a good thing they did, because they got into a battle, and Sal was very nearly beheaded, but because of Torin's intervention, he ended up getting just a scar on the face instead. And so he likes to regale people that are friends with Torin. He likes to regale them about that story. And when Torin introduces him to Loriana, Sal's like, "Hey, did I tell you? Did he ever tell you how we met and how he saved my life and all that?" And of course, Torin, he's like, "No," because he doesn't want Loriana to know certain personal details. Like, he doesn't want her to know about, I guess you could say, the nitty gritty, side of being a mercenary. But nonetheless, though, I mean, it is something that strengthens, the bonds, between Torin and Loriana. Like, when she learns about, how he does value friendship, with people like Sal, I mean, she comes to understand him better as a person. And Sal's one of those characters that you really come to appreciate, because, he, even though he knows that, Torin has his own, baggage, he doesn't judge him for it, especially after Torin saved his life. But, he's come to, see Torin as a friend. And anytime, Torin needs help with something, Sal's like, "I got you." So, a very endearing character. And I liked the idea that, he was a character that wasn't conventionally handsome. Like, he was kind of described as someone that I guess was, a little overweight and balding, but nonetheless was a skilled fighter. So I thought that was actually a nice little touch of realism, or it added to, the realism in the setting. But there was also the character of, Mika, who was one of the Chosen that ultimately ends up befriending Torin and Loriana. And through characters like Mika, we see, I guess you could say, the chosen culture at its best. And you could argue with the character of Loriana, we do as well, but she's someone that didn't even know that she was one of the chosen. So she's not really familiar with their way of life. But Mika, though, I mean, he's actually one of the chosen that's, been like, say, a part of that culture for, ever since he was born. And so, it's interesting seeing things from his perspective. And when he becomes genuine friends with both Loriana and Torin, I mean, it's something that's, very heartwarming in a way, and also goes to offer some measure of hope in that despite this scheming and backstabbing and, plotting that's going on between, say, various factions of, the Chosen as well as the Landers, I mean, there's still hope for, say, a measure of, peace, and understanding between, both the Landers and the Chosen. And we see that with characters like Mika. And he, much like the character of Sal, Mika comes to be someone that, is willing to put his life on the line for his friends, whether they be, fellow Chosen or, these newfound Landers. And so a very endearing character. But, all in all, though, I mean, I really enjoyed the story. I think that, I mean, on one hand, it was a good character study with the main characters, with Torin and Loriana, and we got to see their bond grow. And I like that it didn't really play into the stereotype of the two of them, falling in love, but there's the potential for it. It is touched on. I did like that. So a good character development with the protagonists, and also I liked, the world building that we had, how, say, the myth of creation within this setting actually ties into, the world in a very real way. Like there's tangible evidence of something at work, like something, magical at work, if you will. And so I also liked the complexity that came into play where, we saw the scheming and the plotting that, both sides had. But more so, there's more focus on the Chosen's, aspect of that. And so it was interesting seeing, that level of deception coming from a supposedly superior race. And, we see a lot of it from the perspective of Torin. In fact, just about all the perspective comes from the character of Torin. So it's like we have a limited way of seeing things, because we're seeing just from his eyes, but we learn about things as he learns about them. Or if he's, say, recounting something, like, say, certain information about, Lander culture or Chosen culture, I mean, we're learning about it because he's telling us by way of telling another character about it. So I thought that that was an interesting approach, but also at times added to the suspense because, even though we know that there are people and events outside of Torin at work, because we're only seeing everything from the perspective of one person, it makes it, I guess you could say, much more immediate because, we've been with Torin this whole journey and we're seeing it all through his eyes. And so not only are we seeing, the unknown being experienced by him, because we're in the dark just as much as he is in a lot of ways. But we also see him grow as a person and, get to where it's like he becomes, a stronger and better person and someone who becomes more heroic as the story goes on. Because starting off, he is not a hero. He doesn't consider himself a hero. He's just a mercenary. But as things, progress, I mean, he becomes something closer to the person that he used to be, which was someone who was more idealistic and, was more proud of doing the right thing. So, I mean, it was cool to see Torin get closer to, you know, the good person he used to be as a story goes on, but and also learning certain revelations about him. I mean, they kind of made sense with the setting of the story and, you know, the nature of the plot. So, all in all, though, I mean, you know, this is a good story with a really cool setting, and it was like it was a down to earth setting in a lot of ways, but also, you know, with the elements of the fantastical in play. I mean, with the floating islands and, you know, the chosen. I mean, there's just enough of the fantastical at work to say qualify this book as a fantasy story, and also the, you know, main characters were very endearing and very fleshed out. And so basically, this is a young adult story that had me invested from the get-go. But I'm going to go ahead and give Vassal of El 5 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend checking this out. And I myself would like to, you know, check out some of Gloria Oliver's other books. And so if any of y'all have read her stuff, if you want to make some recommendations, I'll gladly check them out. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Bye.